Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, your shills, dust lasers, peasants, vassals, minions. Welcome. I'm a useful idiot, and good morning. Today I want to talk about something I brought up in a previous video about how pot business is going to be ruined by the government. And one of the things that's interesting about this new pot legalization movement going on across the United States is the implications it has for this cash cow that the law enforcement agencies have had for quite some time, making huge amounts of money. And as usual, the more I dug into this topic, the more ugly it got. And some of these figures are pretty frightening. But as it turns out, confirms everything I've said, which is this drug war industry has been a huge windfall for the police department, and they've grown to depend on it. And I'm not sure how they can replace it, but I have some theories. I'll get into that later. But let's first of all talk about how the pigs are going to lose their cash cow. And this goes back to the 80s. So we have the last 30 years since the 80s in the Reagan administration, and we have these confiscation laws in the drug war, and specifically the Comprehensive Crime Control Act of 1984. And it created two funds. One that has all these asset forfeiture and seizure laws where all the money goes to the Justice Department, and then another fund that all the money goes back to the Treasury. And what happens is a lot of that money then gets kicked back to local police departments across the country. And state, local, federal governments confiscate property, oftentimes from people never even charged, let alone convicted of a crime. So it's a cash cow in the truest sense of the word. And that's one of the other interesting things, is that these systems are duplicated. So not only do we have all this seizure going on at the federal level, but also at the local level. And interestingly enough, we only have figures for one of those, but I'll get into that later. So according to Justice Department statistics, the federal government sets new records every year for asset forfeiture. And under many state laws, state officials can seize property without a warrant and only need, quote, probable cause that it's connected to a drug crime. So that's one of the other reasons it's been such a moneymaker for law enforcement, because they can use it and not even have to have a warrant, and do it without anything other than maybe some loose, vague, probable cause that it might be connected to a drug crime. And this part of the law has also been very handy as well, because obviously police can use some sort of drug-related crime or suspicion of drug connection or some sort of vague probable cause for all sorts of violations of citizens' rights and constitutional rights, as far as justifying all kinds of search and seizure and extrajudicial processes. But and then in the year 2000, there was actually some reform to these seizure laws, because the seizures were still hitting all-time records, and so they changed the criteria from probable cause to something a little more substantial. But unfortunately, it didn't seem to have much effect, because the record numbers of seizure and assets forfeiture figures continue to rise. As I stated earlier, state laws mimic these federal laws, so all the numbers don't reflect seizures at the local level, not involving federal authorities. So since I'm bringing this up, let's look at these figures. The Justice Department fund, and this is just the Justice Department. This is the Treasury fund. In 1985, it was 27 million. So all the assets they seized from citizens, and most of them not even convicted, let alone with warrants or anything else. But in 1985, the year after the Comprehensive Crime Control Act of 1984, it generated $27 million in revenue. But by 1981, 6 years later, it was $644 million. 5 years after that, in 1996, it hit $1 billion. In 2008, it hit $3.1 billion. In 2012, just 2 years ago, it was up to $4.2 billion. That's the amount of monetary value of all the assets seized and liquidated by federal law enforcement officials, and that's just for the Justice Department fund. As I mentioned earlier, there's also the Treasury fund, and I don't have figures for that, and nor do I have figures for what the seizure and asset seizures that are going on at the state and local levels. So we're talking about a staggering amount of money. If 2012, the $4.2 billion is just from going to the Justice Department, we can assume that the Treasury number is comparable, and then just take a stab at what local figures are and assume that we're talking about a figure somewhere between 10 and 15 billion dollars a year in money generated by seizure, asset forfeiture. And for many municipalities and police departments, it's the revenue that they depend on. And some smaller police departments, it ends up being all the revenue they have. And they can seize, when I talk about asset seizure and asset forfeiture, I'm talking about anything that they can justify that was used in the commission of the act, houses, cars, and that sort of thing. And that's the kind of asset seizure we're used to. But the fact is that they can also confiscate everything that they assume was purchased with the proceeds from those criminal acts. So if they get a drug dealer, they can confiscate everything he owns, house, boat, cars, bank accounts, everything. And the judicial system is also set up to be stacked against citizens, so challenges are rare. And in fact, when they made changes to the 1984 law, they no longer allowed court-appointed lawyers. So anybody who wanted to challenge these confiscations and seizures has to pay for all their own legal expenses. So 9 times out of 10, the expenses of actually trying to go back and get your assets exceeds the amount of assets that were seized in the first place. And in fact, 80% never challenged these seizures. 80%. And so this is just free money for law enforcement and police across the country. And one example of just one state is Minnesota. In 2012, Minnesota police seized $8.3 million. So this is how I can speculate about what the numbers are for local police departments when factored into how much money they generate, and how much wealth they generate, how much revenue they generate through these seizures. So Minnesota police in 2012 seized $8.3 million. And they also get, in 2012, the Minnesota police got $4.2 million from the Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant from the Department of Justice. And this is another interesting component of the cash cow drug war industry for the police, and that is this Edward Byrne Memorial Justice grant. And it's $300 to $500 million a year that's distributed nationally by the federal government to these local police departments. And they use it to pay for everything from military hardware to officer overtime. So to say this is a cash cow, once again, showing over and over and over again what a cash cow it is, because this money they get from asset seizures in this drug war, they split up between all the officers and call it officer overtime. So that's another part of this police industry making money off the drug war. And if that wasn't enough, but let me go back to that point for a minute. So you look at one local police department, they got $4.2 million from this Edward Byrne Memorial Justice grant system. And like I say, you have the figures nationally, $300 to $500 million distributed nationally to police departments. So I go back to that original figure that we have somewhere between 10 and 15 billion dollars being generated by the drug war for these law enforcement police departments. And that's police departments, that's FBI, that's all law enforcement offices. And that probably includes ICE as well as the DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, and probably the ATF too as well. But then there's also cottage industries that grow up around these kind of systems that we have in the drug war seizure laws. And one of them is the International Association for Asset Recovery. And what they do is they actually sponsor conferences where law enforcement officers learn how to maximize their asset seizing potential. And they even offer certifications in forfeiture expertise. So we actually have a cottage industry for training police departments to find new ways to make more money seizing drug war assets. So that's the point it's gotten to. And there's a bunch of different other groups like that, International Association for Asset Recovery Watch, etc. So anyway, so there we have it. There's the cash cow industry, the drug war, the pot legalization. Now we have all this entire system being put into jeopardy in a lot of ways for especially local police departments. Federal agencies will probably still doing will still be doing fines. They'll be fighting the drug war at the borders and at airports and the like, and confiscating huge amounts of pot coming in from other Latin America and Mexico, as well as cocaine. So their revenues will continue to generate, but local police departments are going to have to do something. But all in all, I suspect what will happen is we'll just see all these asset seizure and asset forfeiture systems, this infrastructure and these laws, just applied to terrorists. And of course, terrorism is even a more broader spectrum for labeling. So this asset seizure and forfeiture programs and infrastructure will continue, only they'll just apply it in a lot broader and more vague way, using terrorism to justify it. So anyway, there we go. Sorry to hear about that. Pigs, you're going to lose your cash cow. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.